Hello, Goodman Games fans. This is another episode of the Scrivenery where we talk to you about third-party publishing. So today we have a great informative episode for you where Trevor is going to get into great detail on how you go through the process of a Kickstarter. That's become a very popular way to fund projects these days. So we have a couple of guests with us today to aid in this discussion. We have one guest is Nick Baran. Say hi, Nick.
Nick Baran.
Baran, I'm terribly sorry.
Hi, I'm Nick Baran from Breaker Press Games.
And we have Tim, and after my last faux pas, I'm not going to try to pronounce the last name.
That's okay. Sattley, Tim Sattley.
Oh, I would have gotten that one right. Great. And with me, as always, is Trevor, and I'm Ed Stanek. And so here we go. Take it away, Trevor.
Well, thank you, Ed, everybody. First of all, I'd like to thank Tim and Nick for coming on. What we're going to talk about today is Kickstarter, and we're really going to get into some fundamentals of how I plan a Kickstarter. This is not the only way to plan a Kickstarter by any means. I'm certain that there are other ways to do it, but I kind of have about a 7-step plan, and we're going to go over that. And then Tim and Nick are going to give counterpoints. They've both successfully run Kickstarters. Tim, I believe you just finished your first a couple of weeks ago, right?
Yes.
Right? And I finished
February.
my fifth one.
Started and finished in February.
Awesome. And I finished my fifth one yesterday. And Nick, you have finished 10 or 11 now?
I think I'm at 12. So yeah, a bunch.
Yeah. Anyway, so if we could, we're going to go ahead and work through this 7-step plan, and Tim and Nick can give some counterpoints on how they do things differently and such. So, so the first step I have that I always start with is you need an idea, right? I need to build out that idea. And so I thought for our discussion today that that we would create kind of a fake project, okay? And the reason you do this is to figure out what the scope of your project is, what you're trying to accomplish, and kind of peg down what things are going to look like in terms of a third-party published piece of work that supports a DCC or MCC core rules, right? So our example project is one I call the Invisible Blades. It's a cult of Azi Dahaka. The project details are, we want this to be about a 24-page zine dedicated to the goals, the personalities, the rituals and other magical, dare doings and everything of a cult dedicated to Azi Dahaka. Okay. And so if we could go ahead and go to graphic 1, Alana. Okay, that's right. There is a pause. There's a delay, isn't there? So, what we want for this piece is we want it to have about 5,000 words. That's my kind of general rule for fitting in about 24 pages of space. 7 pieces of art, a nice cover piece, and of course we're going to do some layout and everything too. And so we need the words, we need some art, we have a cover. I always work in a digest size, a half-page size. So your mileage may vary on what these words and pieces of art and everything that you need are. But that's the kind of the core product that we're looking at building, right? And we're going to go through some budget stuff and everything and talk about some numbers associated with that as well. There are some ancillary items that I'd like to produce for this product. Like I might like to put out a sticker. As a matter of fact, Nick is well known for his stickers. We might want to put out, since this is a membership patch, right? Since this is a cult, maybe the PCs could become members of the cult. And so having a little membership patch might be a cool thing that you could produce as an ancillary project. And another thing is it'd be, I like bookmarks. 4 of my first 5 Kickstarters have had bookmarks. And so a bookmark with important like secret language notes and everything on the back of it might be a wonderful way to really build this out, right? So we've got a core product, a really nice little book about a cult, supports a well-known patron in DCC, one that gets mentioned quite often, and we've got some cool things to go with it. And so so let's think about just that. That's the project scope. How's that sound to you guys? Does that sound like a decent project? Does that sound like too small of a project? For a beginning project, for me, this sounds to be just about right. Nick, how about you?
Yeah, I think as a beginning project, that's a perfectly sized project. The first project that I did was 32 or 36 pages. And I felt that I was struggling at the end to acquire art and fill that space. And so going small for your first project is definitely a great way to go. Plus, it keeps the costs down, less art that you have to curate. So a great way to go.
Yeah. How about you, Tim? What do you think?
I would go even smaller.
Okay.
And what do I mean by that? If this is your first project, there's a lot of pieces that you're talking about throwing in there and adding stuff to it. When it comes to your first one, I've done one, right? So this is my experience. And I wrote the module, I put it together, I went through all the work to figure it out, and the module was the project.
Yeah.
And not just that, but the other thing, and I'll mention this a little later on, but I'm a big fan of stay in your lane. Know what it is you're good at and what you can do. And me, for instance, I've got a full-time job. I also teach. I've got kids. I've got all the other things going on. I don't have time to ship stuff. I fulfill everything digitally through through drive-through RPG. The print on demand is through drive-through RPG. So I have zero fulfillment. So I can't stuff a sticker or a bookmark or other things like that in there. And if this is your first project, every one of those pieces, that's another hurdle. That's another roadblock that you've got to figure out and understand. And for me, it's about, my ultimate goal is to get stuff in the hands of people, right? To get a product in their hands. So what's the best way to do it? Okay. If it's your first time out of the box, module or zine or whatever it is, keep it simple, right? But once again, that's just my opinion.
Fair enough. Okay. So that's kind of step one, right? We've conceptualized a project, whether it's got some add-ons, whether it's just the product itself. There was some variances. My first project was 56 pages. I think I worked with 4 different artists, and it was the first thing we'd ever put together. It was a little more complicated. It had luck tokens and a whole bunch of other things, and bookmarks and stuff. So your mileage may vary, but this is where it's important to lay this down early and say, here's exactly what I think I can accomplish, right? Because at the next step, we're going to figure out how are we going to accomplish that and how much is it going to cost to accomplish that, right? That's what's coming next. So step 2 is putting together some kind of project budget, right? You need to understand your costs before you get to Kickstarter. You can't run a Kickstarter and then build a budget, because you will ultimately find that you have probably shot yourself in the foot. You need to know exactly how to price things out, so that you can cover all those costs. And we'll talk about what your ultimate goals may be in terms of whether you wish to make profit or not off of those products. That will change your pricing model. But when we're looking at a budget, there's kind of 2 major cost categories that I think about. There are fixed costs and then there are scalable costs. Okay, so a fixed cost is something that I pay it once. It's always going to be the same. It doesn't matter if I print 1 copy or I print 100,000 copies of something. That cost gets paid once. It's always the same. It does not scale with the project, right? So examples of fixed costs, and Elena, if we could go to graphic 2, examples of fixed costs might include writing, art, or layout. Okay, and so those things are you're going to pay for them once. Now you may not pay for all of them, right? You may look at it and say, well, I'm going to do the writing, and so that's a free cost, and I'm going to do the art. That might be a free cost. Like for instance, Sharktopus Games, their first 2 zines, they did the writing and the art and everything. But in general, one of the things that I've noticed, and when I've moved on with Tales from the Smoking Worm and everything to include others, I kind of have a general sense of about what I'm going to pay for about 24 pages of art and everything. In general, 24 pages, about 5,000 words is going to cost me about $300 to get a decent set of words out from somebody if I have to pay for it. For art, for 6 pieces or 7 pieces of art, or well, 7 pieces of art, it's going to cost me about $420. That's just a rough estimate, and your mileage will vary depending on the people you work with, and depending on whether you work with, say, clip art, which Ed and I have talked about several times in previous Scrivenery episodes. So refer back to some of the very first Scrivenery episodes to see ways you can cut costs here, because there's definitely ways to do that. But what I'm doing is I'm budgeting out kind of a typical budget, something that seems reasonable for this scale of a project. A cover, I have never had someone else build me a custom cover for under $300 for art. And actually, usually I walk away pretty happy with that. It takes an awful lot of effort to build a cover. And so especially a good one. And there are examples of really good covers here from all 3 of the other individuals on this Twitch show. Ed, Tim, and Nick have got some wonderful covers, and some of them have used stock art, and some of them have purchased their art. Tim, did you purchase your art? I'm just wondering, or did you do that yourself?
That was stock art. I can barely draw a stick figure. Okay, which by the way, here in case people haven't seen it, that was a piece of stock art that was originally a like a quarter page, and I really liked it. I found it, and it fit perfect with the theme of what the module was. So I reached out to the artist and I said, "Hey, J.E. Shields," and I just said, "Hey, I really like this. I want to use it as a cover. Is there any way I could buy it from you in a larger format so it'll fit a cover?" And he said, "Here, boom." Reformatted it, sent it to me at the right DPI for the cover, and bam, I was done.
That's awesome. And I know that Ed has used some stock art in the past, and have you done some custom art now for your covers? I think the Africa one was custom, wasn't it?
Yeah, so the PAX one was custom as well. We did that one as a commission, and I've never used stock for a cover, but I have used where an artist had an existing piece, which I guess in a certain sense is stock, but it's not in the same sense as they're marketing the same piece of art multiple times.
Right.
But I have had numerous cases where I found a piece of artwork on someone's website and offered them a usage fee for an existing piece. But PAX and Kingdoms of Africa were both commissions. And I think your estimate is pretty solid. I had one cover that I commissioned, just the artwork. I always do all my layout myself.
Right.
But the artwork itself, I did have one where I got the cover commissioned for about $200. So that was a really good price on that one, but that was unusual.
Yeah. And so any of my Tales from the Smoking Worms, these covers run $300. And actually I cycle through the same artist multiple times on those because they really like working with that. There's a specific style. And Nick, you've done lots of custom artists, but you did Rabid Dogs was clip art, wasn't it?
No, actually that was a custom piece. That was the first piece of art that I ever commissioned, and I commissioned it from Rich Sampson, Art of Nerdgore. And I think I was trying to remember back because the range is very extreme for the art that I have commissioned. I'm pretty sure Precipice of Corruption, which is right behind me, was $600 for that cover.
Yeah.
Whereas the cover of the Stennard Courier was actually originally a piece of interior art that I think I paid $60 for. So ranged from 60 to 600.
Yeah. So again, take all of this in perspective. Your mileage is going to vary, but we, in order to make this work, I wanted to put together just a general budget so you understood what that there are costs, and these are reasonable prices for what I've done in the past. If you're going to do your own layout, obviously that layout is going to be just a time investment, right? If you're not going to do your own layout, an average layout of about 24 pages for me costs about $300. And so that's pretty standard. I believe Tim, Nick, and Ed, you all do your own layouts, right?
Yeah.
And what I do is I actually work with my daughter, Caitlin Stamper, who is a designer for HarperCollins. And so this is what she does for a living. And it happens to be a great thing for us to do together and stuff. And so I often will lay out a rough layout of what I want. I'll play in InDesign, and then she'll come in and kind of clean it up, and we'll get a general sense of what we're looking for. We'll go back and forth until we know what that's supposed to look like. And part of that has to do with, I'm looking from the sensibilities of a game designer. She's looking from a sensibilities of a designer, right? And those two things are kind of a give and take sometimes. But yeah, in general, if you were to have someone else do your layout, I've heard numbers like this quoted across several different individuals when I've had conversations about how they get products produced and everything. So your total fixed costs here for your book, your Ozzy Dahaka cult book, are about $1,320 right now. Right now, again, you can drop some of that out by doing it yourself, but this is just a good ballpark. Looking at it and saying, if I don't have time to do it, and I got to hire somebody, how much is it going to cost me? So that's fixed cost.
I'll get it done for less than 500.
All right. Thank you, Nick. So if you need him, Nick can do most of this stuff. He has the best stick figures. All right.
Since we're hey Trevor, real quick,
yeah.
since we're talking about numbers, one thing is this module that I just finished was actually going to be the second one that I did.
Okay.
I started off with, I put together an adventure for my home table, and they really liked it. And there were some cool things in there, and and MCC content we could use a lot more of because there's not as much of that out there. So I was going to do it, but I realized that I needed to have a custom artwork done for the cover and some other things. And I put together in my brain a little bit of a budget and realized, yeah, I'm not pulling this out of my bank account without my wife, kind of not being happy. So what I did was I took a second thing that I had written and I did it with all stock art. The entire book was either free art or stock art. Taught myself the layout programs, laid it out, did it, and said, okay, look, my cost into this is, in all honesty, probably less than $100.
Right.
But the whole purpose of it was to generate the proceeds so I could buy the artwork for the next one that's coming out.
Yeah. So and that's a great way to do it. Yeah, absolutely.
So since we're talking about numbers, I just wanted to kind of toss that out there, especially if someone's looking at, their first thing or trying to come out of the box.
Right.
And trying to make your projects your own little personal Ponzi scheme to yourself. Yeah, each one funds the next one.
I can't use the P word. I'm in the finance industry, so.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
That's about how they work.
That is not part of my world ever.
So, and so this is great advice, right? You can drop these costs, but if you need to pay people to get this done, and some people will, you need to think about them, right? And these are fixed costs. They're not going to go up whether we print a copy or 10,000 copies. Now that would be a very expensive first copy, right? And we'll talk about that in a couple minutes. But the other group of costs that I want to talk about are scalable costs. Can we go to the next slide, please, Elena? And so scalable costs are different, right? They depend on volume to reduce the overall cost per issue, okay? Not the overall cost for the whole project, but the overall cost per issue. And so if you are looking to bring your issue in at a specific price point, then that's going to give you an idea of how many copies you need to sell, right? Depending on some basic variables. And one of these things are, and I'm working with the project that I outlined here. So, you may not be building stickers or patches or bookmarks, or you may look at these scalable costs and say, there's no way I can afford these things. And so I'm going to ditch those because they're just ancillary. All I really need is the printing costs, right? So these are good examples of scalable costs: getting something printed, building stickers and printing them, making patches and bookmarks and stuff like this. And there are a couple ways you can do some of these things for free. Actually, you can do almost all of them for free, especially if you have an embroidery sewing machine, which is an expensive piece of equipment right there. So just go get your patches made. And we'll talk about that in a second. But here's the point. I've got these costed out at a rough estimate of if I do 100 books, if I do 200 copies, or I do 300 copies. And what you can see almost right away is that for printing, for instance, at 100 copies, it's going to cost me $8 a book. Now that's expensive. And every single one of my co-hosts secretly just went, oh my God, why is he paying that much? And I want to remind you that I'm talking about are projects that I build. And so these are custom Rizzo projects, which have much higher print costs and everything. And so if you're using really expensive papers and stuff like that, that's where it's going to come in. You can get this lower, right? You can go with cheaper paper. You can go with, basically you can go with essentially digital printing and stuff like this. There's ways to make this cheaper, but let's just work with a budget. At $200, that printing cost is $7 per book, right? And at $500, we're going to get it down to $6 per book. So you can see that that's a scalable cost. The individual price per book goes down as I go up in volume, but the overall cost goes up because the volume goes up. So why is it that scalable costs work this way? Well, they work this way because the setup time is expensive. Setting up a print run of a book is more expensive than printing the book, right? So once you've printed the first book, the next 100,000 books that you print take a lot less effort, right? And so the prices come down to represent that. If I print 2 short print runs on a traditional offset press or something like this, or if I go to Mixam or anything, they're going to charge me a setup fee both times to get into the system. And I'm going to have to pay that setup fee. And so my prices are going to be higher than if I did one bulk print run. But there's a downside to this logic, right? And it is, I would refer you out to RPG Rambling. Jeffrey Jones has done a couple of excellent interviews with industry insiders who have been around for decades in the industry, and they will tell you the death knell of any game company, of anybody producing product, is to look at that and say, it is so much cheaper to get the next 1,000 or the next 100 or the next 500. I'm going to go ahead and buy that, and then it sits in your garage and never sells.
Well, in a certain sense, that's one of the things that killed TSR, right? I mean,
that's one of the things, right?
In a certain sense, they had a huge lot of materials that they just
come back, right? So TSR was given, they had a deal with like Random House or something, right? Where they were sending out all of their publishing works, and novels work this way. You basically pre-sell them to like B. Dalton's, which doesn't exist anymore, or all your W.H. Smith and all these booksellers and stuff, all of which doesn't. That's how long it's been since I've been to a bookstore that isn't a private one. What are half price books or places like that, or Amazon, right? You sell them to them, and they agree to buy them at a very, they're gonna buy a certain number, and they're gonna buy them at a certain price. But at a certain point, if they don't sell them, they're gonna return them to you, right? And that's what did in TSR, right? So suddenly a whole bunch of these people came due with like millions of dollars worth of books, and they said, hey, by the way, we need our money back. But that's the point is you could print 500, but if you're only going to sell 200 or 100, and if you look at Kickstarters for DCC and MCC titles, if you've got a little source book like this, how many copies did you sell of the first Rabid Dogs, Nick?
The first printing was 250 copies.
But how many copies did you sell in the first Kickstarter?
119, I think.
Yeah, on my first Kickstarter, I sold about 130 copies, and then Goodman Games buys a certain number, but it depends. That number fluctuates. I've noticed as he's more happy with the product and he knows it's going to be around and he sees that there's interest in it, that number goes up. My first purchase from Goodman was, I think it was only 20 copies. Yep. Didn't you say yours was like pretty low too?
Mine was 20.
Mine, 20. So I mean, he made a little initial investment, and I could count on that. And I asked for him what that was going to be ahead of time before I printed, obviously. So that takes us to our next slide. What I'm going to say is that we're going to go with the middle ground here and look at most Kickstarters and say they sell about 200 copies. Now that doesn't mean they have 200 backers. Tim, what was the backer count for your project you just finished?
I had about a little over 100 backers. 75 were hard copy, and then the rest were digital.
Yeah, and so the Kickstarter that ended last night for me, I think I had 279 backers, and only about 175 backers bought the actual hard copy. The rest bought the digital, right? And so Nick, I don't know, do you do digital only sales? I always buy a physical copy, so I don't even bother to look.
I do digital, but yeah.
But are you seeing numbers that are kind of similar to that? What I find is about a third of the people will only want digital, and about 2/3 of them want something physical.
Yeah, I would say about a quarter.
Yeah.
Quarter to a third. Yeah.
So what we're going to do is we're going to hone in on that 200 copy cost, and we're going to say, Elena, can I have the next slide? Is it maybe up? Okay. And with that, we get to something where we have our total cost, minimum cost, right? And so why are we going with the total minimum cost? Because we might spend more if we sell more than 200 copies. Our printer is going to have no problem adding 50 copies to the sale at the very end, right? And you'll have the money to cover it. But you have to factor in the price per book so you can know how much you can price out your Kickstarter at. Does that make sense? And so you have to look at that. So what we've got is we've got $1,150 per 100 copies, which is our fixed costs plus our scalable costs set to 200 copies, which is a reasonable number to think about. And then and everything. So that tells us we're gonna pay, if we did basically nothing except orchestrated the whole event, we're gonna pay about $1,150 per book, right? Just to get that out the door. Now that's high. I guarantee you that's high, and I bet nobody here pays that overall. But it's important to look at things like fixed costs versus scalable costs and know the differences and stuff. Okay. So comments, Tim, Nick. How about Tim? You go first.
It's remember I said that my cost was $100. That was for production costs.
Right.
As soon as you start adding in print costs and shipping and taxes, that's north of $500 on 100, on 75 copies that are going out. Once again, though, I do it print on demand, so it's like I said, I don't want to deal with the shipping and stuff like that. So that being said, it's when I put the initial order in for everybody, it's one big run and it goes out, and it's actually better than if you buy a print on demand individually, right? So it's that was one nice part about that, which I figured out as I was doing this. But yeah, the scalable cost, it's the more people that buy it, that's going to go up, and it's going to but at the same time, I guess that's a nice part about PDFs and digital as well, which is why I like to include the PDF on it, because the PDF, it's all fixed cost. There is no scalable cost on providing a digital product. And I also noticed that a lot of people who buy the digital product tend to be people from outside the United States, where shipping can get kind of crazy from what I hear.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I had a guy on the Kickstarter that ended last night. I was not shipping to Europe. And I had a gentleman who got on the messages. You can privately message your creators during a Kickstarter. And we had probably a 30 email message conversation about he wanted the physical product, and I had miniatures attached to this Kickstarter and everything. And he wanted a print copy of those, and he wanted them shipped to Sweden, and he was willing to pay the shipping costs. And so I looked it up, and I was like, it's going to be $40 to ship these to Sweden. Do you understand? I mean, that's a huge cost. And he's like, I don't care about the cost. And so I put in one European, for just the whole deal, which was to get everything at once, which is what he told me he wanted. And I got one purchase, right? And I did that for him because when a customer reaches out to you and they say, I'm willing to pay the price, then I'm willing to add it. But in general, what I find is that we have to have that conversation, I think, with overseas folks, where I say, you understand that I believe this is prohibitively expensive, and that's why it's not there. Now, I know that Nick ships internationally and does so in a much cheaper fashion. My stuff's boxed, it's packaged, it's meant to not get broken. You're shipping just books. You don't have things like miniatures that you're adding on, and so you found a cheaper way to ship to Europe and Australia. Although, frankly, shipping to Australia the past 6 months has been crazy. So they shut down their borders to the U.S. except for FedEx Overnight Express, even though it takes 2 to 3 months to get there, and so it's it's been expensive. Yeah. Sorry, Nick, you want to comment?
Yeah. So we covered a lot in this section, and one of the things that is very different about how I approach things is that I play very fast and loose with how I do things, because I came up in punk, and so you just do things because you're compelled to do things. And so my like when I did Rabid Dogs, I can't remember what the the goal was on that one. It was probably $500. It might have been even less, because I thought to myself, I can do this for less than $500. And the goal was to make 100 copies. If I can just get enough backers that I can make 100 copies, I can do this. And so that is how I go into budgeting. It's like, okay, looking at things, it's like, okay, if I use stock art and it's going to cost me like $5 a piece, and I need to have like 10 pieces of art in order to be able to get through the thing. I do look at the numbers, but I don't have a spreadsheet. I just, I eyeball everything. The other thing, what were you saying?
Go ahead. And this actually is going to segue into the next step really nicely. I often have spreadsheets, but they're usually multiples looking at different costs. So it's not like I have a master plan most of the time and everything. Go ahead, Nick, your second comment.
And the other thing I was going to say is that I consider shipping a separate pool. It's like, and one of the things that's, I wanted to comment on the thing that you said was that, yes, I do ship to Europe, and there has been I should say I ship anywhere in the world. And that is something that has had its hiccups, and there have been complaints, but I want to get my stuff out into the world. That's another thing that comes from, running a record label and having been in bands. It's like, I wanted my stuff everywhere. And so my approach to that, as I do like having a digital version, but instead of going for print on demand, I make my stuff accessible by figuring out, okay, how do I ship this everywhere? And with each Kickstarter I do, it's like the number of options of shipping options gets bigger and bigger and bigger, because I just want to get that stuff out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Ed, do we have any questions or anything at this point?
So there's been some comments about the significance of the digital option.
Yeah.
And, basically a bit of discussion. Some people feel like, oh, I'd much rather have the physical book. Some people are saying, I consider it a very significant thing that there's that PDF is there as part of the package. I know that I'll personally will say anymore, I feel like if I'm getting a physical copy, I expect to also get a digital. If it's not there, that seems conspicuous by its absence. And you look at it this way, depending on the approach that you take with getting that into the or getting your layout done, it doesn't have to be that much more of an effort to produce a PDF copy, and to have, I think it just adds appeal, for the people who are going to only buy PDF because of shipping issues. I've had a number of people who've bought mine that have been in Australia and so forth, and yeah, it's prohibitively expensive. But also just because it's going to be more appealing to some people who just want to have both versions of it, depending on how they're using it. And so I feel like for the amount of effort that it takes to get that, and like was said before, the PDF the PDF does not have ongoing scalable cost. And so once you've sunk the time and effort and cost into getting that out there, everything after that is profit, and it's and so it's, I see probably at the beginning, when I first put out a book, it's maybe about 60% get the physical copy. As the book ages, I tend to get more people who are to where it's 80% are just getting the PDF, and I would probably miss out on those sales. I imagine a lot of those people wouldn't be buying the book. They wouldn't be buying it at all. I would probably be missing out on those sales. And those sales there where the entire cost of it is coming to me because there's no cost to it. Yeah, Nick.
Yeah, one thing that I want to piggyback on with what you're talking about, Ed, is that as somebody who never uses PDFs at the table. It's
Mhm.
just not something that I do.
Mhm.
It was a bit of a hang up when I did Rabid Dogs. It took a little time for me to, like, especially because I had never tried to upload anything to Drive Through RPG. And I remember going through that process being very frustrating for me. But once I learned the process and got my stuff up there, everything that Ed just said about you will continue to generate sales, and you will continue to have income coming in on your products as long as they're just out there in the world. So
Yeah, no, and that's absolutely true. And don't get me wrong, I don't think there's anybody here who is thinking that PDFs are wrong. I mean, I have a PDF only, bracket every single time. And as a matter of fact, on the last Kickstarter that ended yesterday, I think it was $20 or $25 for over 300 pages of PDF content, right? All 4 smoking worms and 2 monographs. So that, I believe in making those cheap and making those easily accessible. I will say that my attitude towards PDF has changed since the very first smoking worm. I am not a huge PDF user. I do understand that sometimes necessity requires that I use them. If I'm running a game online or something, it's really nice to be able to pull it up and copy and paste text that I'm giving to specific people, for instance. But at my own home table, I don't like digital devices. That's about, camaraderie and hanging out and being with people more than anything else. And I just have a deep love of really well produced books. I mean, so you have to take that with a grain of salt, which brings us right into the next step, and that's goals. Okay. What I think you've learned just by listening to the 4 of us is that we each have different goals for what we want to get out of this. Okay. Every single one of us has a different goal as a publisher, as a person, as an individual, about how we produce our products, what we think of our products. Do we think of them as, I just want to get the content out there for people to play. I don't care what it looks like, or, what form it comes in, or are we somebody who thinks, form and function go together and they're really important? Those, and there's no, I'm not trying to naysay one or the other. Don't get me wrong. Sometimes form is important and sometimes function is important. I believe in both, but goals are really important. And I'm organize goals into, into 3 categories in terms of this intro conversation on this. Right. And they look like this. And Elena, could we get the next slide? So goals to me, and this comes out of a conversation I had with Jim Wampler before we ran the first Smoking Worm Kickstarter. And Jim sat down with Brian Gilkison and I, and he was like, Trevor, he's like, Brian, he's like, I need to know first and foremost, before we do anything else, what is your goal, right? Is this a passion project where it doesn't matter how much you really get off of Kickstarter? You're going to make it no matter what, even if you pull it out of pocket, right? Talking to your spouses and everything, Tim, I totally understand that. And everything, those are other asides in this conversation, but that's what Jim asked us. Is this a passion project? Is it something you're going to do? Or is this a nonprofit project where you're going to do it, but you can't lose money? And if you don't make money, that's okay, right? Or is it a for-profit project where you have to make a certain bottom line, okay? And you have to produce the product, but you need to make a certain amount. Now, those 3 broad goals, right, change this budget in interesting ways, in ways that I can't put on an easy spreadsheet to show you, and everything. So when you have those goals in mind, if it's a passion project, well, you're going to produce exactly what you want to produce, and if it costs you so much, you're going to go with it. And if you lose money on the Kickstarter, you're going to lose money on the Kickstarter, and you're going to be okay with that because it's a passion project. If it's a nonprofit project, as long as you don't lose money, you're happy. And if that means you've got to go to a lower quality paper, or you've got to find a cheaper revenue for distribution, or you've got to find some way to cut corners to make it work, that's going to be okay. If it's a for-profit project, and those are perfectly acceptable. I mean, remember, Goodman Games is a for-profit industry, right? The gaming industry is a for-profit industry. Then you have a bottom line, and you know what I need to make a 20% return on whatever that investment is, time plus costs, right? whatever that may look like. And you may have a different goal there. It may not be 20%, it could be 5%, it could be 10%. I'm not going to worry about that. But the point is your goal is going to drive how you produce your project. And I think hopefully everyone will agree with me that that's exactly what we've been hearing with differing opinions, is the goal drove the project. I think, Tim, you've spoken eloquently about that, right? Your goal of doing the second project first was to fund the first project. That's an overarching goal. It needed to make money, and it needed to make money in a way that made the first project possible, right? And so on and so forth. So any comments about goals? And we're not going to go too deep into them, but Nick, how about you? Why don't you start?
Yeah, so I definitely overlap between passion project and for-profit. Part of the reason why I can play fast and loose is because of the fact that when I approach a project, it's like, this is going to get made. This is going to happen. But at the same time, I want Breaker Press games to be, my future. I want that to be what I do with, my 50s and 60s and 70s, hopefully. And so, it needs to turn a profit so that I can keep making cool stuff. But at the same time, yeah, it's going to happen regardless. So.
Tim, how about you?
Yeah, I feel funny saying this because I am a capitalist from the word go, and I 100% believe in profit. But for me, this is more of a passion / nonprofit. I've got a career I'm extremely happy with. I teach finance, and as a part-time job, I teach finance at a college. So I'm already busy enough doing stuff. The whole reason I'm doing this is because I've had some cool ideas. I threw them out on the table. It worked great. And people were like, hey, get this out in the world. I'm like, you know what? That'd be cool. I want to make cool things. Matter of fact, I had the greatest experience at GaryCon last week when we ran this module. It was one of the funnest times I've ever had at a con. Watching a 7-year-old boy take down his 12-year-old sister for the win. And then like half an hour later, seeing them in the concourse, still arguing about it. And it was hilarious. I had a blast with it. So the point being is that I came up with the idea. This is cool. Let's throw it out there. I want to make this happen. I want it to pay for itself though, because I don't want to, I don't want to dip into the family finances to do it. And so it is kind of that, like I said, a cross between the passion project and the not for profit.
Absolutely. Ed, how about you?
Yeah, I'm actually a lot like Tim in that respect. To a certain extent, I want them to break even just because I don't, but I don't want to be dipping into the savings for it. But this is a side gig for me. Now, unfortunately, the first book was very much a passion thing. That was the prospect of having our own book published was, oh my gosh, that's such a cool notion. And yeah, that was great.
Feels cool.
It does. It really does feel awesome. And I highly recommend pursuing that. And most of our projects, we've I try to make my margins fairly lean so that they're affordable. And most of them we've turned at least a decent profit. The Africa book, I don't know if we're ever going to break even on that, but that was very much a passion project because there was nothing in that space. And so we felt like the gaming world needed something in that space. But for the most part, I do it because it's great fun. But I want to break even at least and cover my costs.
Yeah. Nick.
There's one thing that I wanted to say to Tim, and I thought about this actually when you were interviewed before. The one thing that you don't get to experience or haven't gotten to experience with your methodology of doing the digital is there is something so incredibly satisfying when you print the thing, you have it at your house, you pack them up, and then they're all gone. It is such a rewarding feeling.
The accomplishment, right?
Yeah,
it's like raising ducks or something, right?
Yes,
You know,
exactly.
and then sending them off to your friends for Thanksgiving supper.
You know, along that same line too, as you're talking about the great experience of people, you know, enjoying the game as you rent it. There's quite a rush too when you sell someone a physical copy at a con and they ask you to autograph it for them. That's that's pretty
felt
cool.
Weird. I seriously, everybody who asked me to sign it, I'm like, why? I didn't. It just felt weird to me. But
yeah, and so, and you know, and I feel the same way, Nick. I totally agree. There is something about, you know, working for months on a project, you know, carefully selecting the paper, you know, building cool fold outs and things like this. And there's only certain formats you can do that in, and then getting it and working with it and everything and having it on your desk. And so that, you know, that is something that, you know, I vacillate between passion project and for profit as well. This was always a long-term goal to do this in my retirement. It's moved up a little bit, and it's broadened and changed. My goals have changed, and yours will too, right? They may not always be passion, profit, nonprofit. You know, they may move around, and they may move around on a single project. It just depends on how it goes. Definitely, you know, I have a deep enjoyment of getting into the creative juices and really exploring a project to its fullest extent and saying, what is all the permutations of what I want? If I had the box set for this project, what would it look like? When, you know, I can't tell you how many times I've opened up someone else's project, and I'm not talking about people here, but like a TSR city system is a good example. Opening up the city system and thinking, oh, I'm going to be able to build cities. And I was like, what? That's it? It's like 6 maps and 20 pages. There's no way I can do anything with this. It's water deep thing of junk, right? And I literally sold it the next day to another guy, and everything. That was disappointing. So when I think about projects, I'm like, what is it? What is the B end? And, you know, what is the maximum immersion of what this project should feel like? What would I want to see? And I build that, and I try and figure out a way to make it profitable. and those budget numbers reflect the fact that I pay more often for things, and I'm willing to print at higher costs to get things like risographic printing. You can bring all of these costs down. I think that's important to think about. And
we've done, like Trevor's mentioned before, we've done episodes that have dealt with those facets, addressing costs for printing, for artwork, and so forth. And so please look to our previous episodes if you're concerned and curious about how do I address those production costs.
Yeah, we had a great interview with Brad McDevitt. That's episode 3. Episode 1 and 2 broke down into details on how you could find things cheaper, how you could make things easier and things like that. And so we're skimming some of these topics to stay on topic here. Tim, you had a comment, I think.
I just want to say one thing. This feels very surreal to me, in the fact that 3 months ago, I was watching your videos trying to figure out how to do this self-publishing thing. And now I'm sitting here with the module done, shipped to everybody in their hands, and I'm on the show. So it's just kind of a weird feeling.
You know, let me just say that's I find that really exciting, because the whole point of this series from day one was to encourage people, you can do it. Yeah. That jump on this bandwagon, you can get your product out there too. And I find that thrilling to find out that that you follow that road. That's fabulous.
Yeah, that makes it all worth it. We're going to keep going. So moving on to step 4. Now that you've kind of got a scope of your project, you know what your goal is and everything, this is where you actually produce your product, right? You write it, you go into layout. I do writing, and then I do layout, and then I do visuals. I know people do them otherwise. Nick has talked extensively on previous episodes about the fact that he now does layout first, and often has art ready to place and then writes around that. That's a totally acceptable method. I guarantee you, with today's InDesign or Scrivener or something like that, that's possible. When I started working with PageMaker, you would have crashed that program and lost everything forever. And so I work in draft mode, iterative drafts, and I hand them back and forth to a small cadre of people. My developmental editors, Brian Gilkison and John Olszewski, sometimes an outside source if I need an outside opinion. I think I may have sent something to Nick once. I know I've sent something to a couple other people, and I said, here's where we're at. We're thinking this. Do you think it needs more work? But the writing part is iterative, and I keep drafts. The reason I keep drafts is I want to make sure that if I ever have to, I can go back and credit who did what, and stuff. That's, to me, that's really important. Then layout, then we identify the visuals, we hire the artists, we put it all together, and bring it all together and everything and stuff. And we get pre-approval at that point from Goodman Games. And this is something we don't talk about a lot. As you get approvals more and more, as you work with Goodman Games, I find that it's easier to get pre-approvals earlier and faster. And so the first Smoking Worm, we had to send everything basically laid out and 90% finished with art and everything placed before Goodman would really look at it. And no fault of him. That's how that works, and I get it. He wants to see what this is going to look like. And I think with Smoking Worm 4, I sent all the manuscripts in PDF, and I said, here are the manuscripts. Can I get those locked off before I go to layout? Right? Because I can easily pull a manuscript, but if I've already gone to layout, now I've spent money and I've wasted other people's time. And so that's an important step for me. And everything, that's my general process. Your mileage could be very different on how you put your book together. And that's perfectly okay. And as a matter of fact, I'm hoping in a couple of upcoming episodes that I have some inspiration from Nick based on our conversations and the punk movement and building things yourself and on paper and everything. I'd like to bring some artists in who do that type of stuff and make some of this stuff themselves, so we can talk about how you can even reduce your costs further. What about you guys? Is that your general flow plan? Does that just about fit, or is yours radically different? How about Tim? We start with you.
Actually, the funny thing is, I agree with all the steps in this whole process that we've talked about.
Yeah.
But for me, this was step one.
Yeah.
Step one was I wrote the whole thing. I wrote and wrote it in Word. This is what I did. Played it at the table with my regular group. Did it work did what I had in my brain work on paper? Yes, it did. Okay, great. Hey, let's produce this. And then I went from step 3 to step 2 to then what were my goals? Then maybe I went up to 1 for a little bit. Then I looked at the numbers for a second, so yeah. I went through every step, but as a first thing, it was in a completely different order. Yeah. So wrote it, did the whole thing in Word, had everything nailed out, looked at it and said, what pictures do I want to illustrate this particular, what this was, what were the key things I wanted, gathered that together, did a layout, and I taught myself Microsoft Publisher, did it in there, only to find out from watching this show that Drive-Thru RPG doesn't accept those files. So then I had to go teach myself Scribus. Yeah, to try and figure out how to do that. But point being is, it started with writing everything first, putting all that together, and then figuring out what were the important pieces that I wanted illustrated, and then finding, stock art, clip art, or, I called my niece who went to art school and said, hey, do you know anyone who would be interested in doing some of this? Because I figure her friends probably need some cash. So, and they'd also probably do something fairly inexpensively. I'm not going to go to, a big name and pay big money when I'm just trying to figure this stuff out. So that's who I did. Actually, that's who I worked some of my my stuff through on the next one is a guy by the name of Gambit, who actually did some really cool stuff for it. So.
Excellent. Yeah. And I agree with you that this is a living system. I'm just, part of the goal of this was to put down a step series and everything. I often work from step 4 and in the reverse. So Nick, how about you?
Yeah. So I also sort of start with step 4. And when I did Rabid Dogs, things were very different than how I approach things now. With Rabid Dogs, I had a bunch of articles written, and I had commissioned art for those particular articles, and I had dumped all of that information into a Google Doc, and I sent that to Joseph for approval. And that was what I was using for the Rabid Dogs Kickstarter, was just that stuff. And I was going to do all the layout physical cut and paste. And then the pandemic happened and I couldn't go to the copy shop. And so that totally changed how I approached things. And so that Rabid Dogs ended up being laid out by my business partner, Hal. And he learned how to use InDesign in order to lay that out. And then he taught me InDesign after he did the layout for Precipice of Corruption, because he was like, all right, fly, little bird. You can do this yourself. So that's really what happened. But yeah, as time went on and I analyzed different formats and what have you, I started switching to like a control panel format, and that's why I started writing directly into InDesign and utilizing that as my method. But then that way, I know how many pages it's going to be. I know the general format. Everything's kind of like, I start with a table of contents / outline and build my document from that outline. And then I know exactly what I'm working with and can move from there. So,
yeah,
that's pretty
absolutely
gutsy to do your writing directly in in the layout software.
yeah, well, it allows me, because what I ran into with Precipice was that there were these huge sections of text that wouldn't fit onto the 2-page spread, and I had to cut and cut and cut and cut. So instead, I just take the InDesign text or files and I send them to my editor, and my editor just drags and drops all the text into a word processing program, and then utilizes that to then send the edits back and say, okay, this is what you need to do.
All right.
Yeah. Ed, how about you? I think you and I have talked about our process quite a bit in the past, but
yeah, mine has evolved a little bit. With the first project, it was a little bit more like the steps that you've laid out. As the projects have gone on, I think I'm on book number 9 now. I just jump in and start writing. I get the whole manuscript written, and then I take it into Scribus, start doing my layout, put in my graphics at that point. And so I'm a little bit more I'm a little bit more okay with doing it on the run.
Yeah.
Now that I've had several under my belt.
And my experience is that once you have experienced that, that's much better, much more accomplishable, right? I mean, it depends on the project, to be honest. Sometimes I envision a project, I put little word counts next to it, I try and meet those goals. But I write things to write things, and I want to go to the logical conclusion of what, at the end of the day, I want to go, yeah, okay, I've explored that topic as much as I want to explore it. And so if I blow through those, I'm constantly moving content around for Tales of the Smoking Worm. As a matter of fact, right now we have tentative articles all the way out to issue 12. And the next like 5 or 6 issues are pretty much packed, right? So I'm constantly going, oh, that's too big, I need to move it over here, and slowly then filter in smaller projects and stuff. Okay. And so, so things move around. So you've produced your project, and now we've thought about our project. We've got a budget. We kind of have an idea of goals and everything, and we're going to go on to Kickstarter. And, originally when I envisioned this, I was thinking, I would take you through step-by-step an actual Kickstarter build. It turns out that's actually really long and dry and not very interesting. The ins and outs of how you build a Kickstarter project are I go back and forth. They take me about a month to build. They're very organic. Again, it's iterative and everything. So I'm just going to kind of take you across it and highlight some things that I found to be really important, if that makes sense. And obviously we have Tim and we have Nick who can jump in and tell me, that's still important or it's not important. The first thing I want to talk about is the Kickstarter process. And I'm just seeing that we maybe don't have those graphics anymore. Elena, do we have graphic 6? You're saying we don't have it? Okay, so we've lost it. So what graphic 6 shows you is a screenshot of what of the steps that Kickstarter outlines for you. So once you set up a Kickstarter account, you tell them you want to make something, it's going to go in and it's going to ask for some basic information. It's going to ask you for the story, and that's the page that you see, that the public sees. You're building it. It's going to have a rewards section, and then it's going to have some kind of some other stuff that you've got to build out and everything. Those things are really important. You need to know, you need to come up with a title, you need to come up with a visual and things like that. Your story needs to be a story. And I do believe that the best Kickstarters have really good stories. This is what we're trying to produce, and this is why we need your help, right? And then you have the little infos about who the people are and everything. Those are good selling points as well. But the rewards section is really what I wanted to highlight. And the reason I want to highlight it is rewards come in 3 categories. Okay, there's 3 things. There's the reward tier. Okay. Maybe it's an all digital tier. Maybe it's a digital, what we call print plus PDF at the smoking room. Maybe it's an all in where every goodie is in that tier or something, and it gives you a bit of a discount. That's what the consumer sees, the pledge person sees, right? The backer sees. But then there's an add-on category as well. And that says, okay, once they've pledged for something, I want them to see certain things. So I have 5 or 6 products under my belt at this point, and those pop up as add-ons. You could pick those up. If you've never experienced Tales from the Smoking Worm, you could buy a couple of copies of Tales from the Smoking Worm, or you could buy this or that, right? Those are add-ons. The one thing the pledger never sees is the items. And in my opinion, items have kind of come about in the last 9 months to a year on Kickstarter. They're the most important category. Why do I think they're the most important category? I think they're the most important category because the item is an individual thing that you are offering as a reward for the backer support. It may be a print copy of your magazine, your zine. It may be a PDF of your zine. And by breaking it down to the most basic unit of an item, there's a fundamentals section at the fulfillment section at the very end of the Kickstarter back page that backers never see, but people who run Kickstarters do, that itemizes and tells you how many you need of each thing, right? Of each item. And so this is why this is really important. You build your items out first. And then when you go to add-ons and create add-ons, it'll have a category saying, are there any items you want to add to this add-on? And you can put as many items in there as you want. So I had a grab bag PDF that had 7 different PDFs. I had an item for each PDF. And in the add-on, I had each of the 7 PDFs in there as items. So Kickstarter is doing some fundamental counting for you when your backers pledge, right? And this is really helpful because if you don't create add-on or items, then you're left having to remember and do a whole bunch of hand math, right? Actually do that yourself. And so this is a great back-end source that you're going to want to work from. It took me a little bit of rethinking to go from just rewards and add-ons to items and then add-ons and rewards, and build them in backwards. But there's a logic to it that is kind of unimpeachable. And at the end of the day, I have a list when the Kickstarter ends and it says, print of this thing. I need 157 copies of that. Of the PDF, I'm going to have 209 copies of that. Well, that doesn't really matter because it's not a scalable item. I don't have to worry about print runs or anything on a PDF. And if I've got an add-on like a bookmark, it's going to say, you need so many bookmarks. You need so many patches, so on and so forth. And so that fulfillment section is really the thing that I pay the most attention to when I'm then ordering things and making sure I have everything that I need to fulfill. So let me think. Yeah. Questions. Tim, do you work? Did you encounter items? Did you just not worry about them? I mean, what was your mileage on that?
So I didn't have to worry about it. I have one item. One item. This is the first thing I produced. So that kind of made my list very easy to figure out. I had a PDF, I had a hard copy. That was it. And actually, thank you for what you just said, because now I know that going forward, that may be something I will have to deal with in the future. But That being said, if there's one thing a piece of advice I could give, it's go out and look at other Kickstarters that either you've backed or you've seen out there that are on products that you like. And I copied the heck out of stuff and just like, okay, this is the type of thing I'm doing. Okay, how did they do it? Boom, 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 boom. And it's funny is you said that you spent a month on your Kickstarter, which by the way, yours looks awesome. I love the artwork and the way that you lay out everything. I spent about an hour and a half, and it's bare bones, basic. But once again, I have one item. So it was just the first thing that was on there. And then the next one will be, guess what? 2 items.
2 items.
So it's, you know, it's fairly simple from my perspective.
And that's perfectly acceptable too, right? I mean, that's not a problem. You know, if you think about it, I often am tracking a lot of things and stuff, and that logistics, just having that fulfillment section is really, really handy. Nick, how about you?
Yeah, so with all of the Kickstarters that I've done up until Cleft in the Mangled Hills, there were no items.
That's right.
So that was never like a consideration. And when I was building the Cleft in the Mangled Hills Hillwood Camp Kickstarter, that was the first time that I utilized items. But I don't have any deep thoughts about it other than the fact that, hey, Kickstarter added this thing that seems really useful. That's great.
Yeah, and it really is a fundamentally, I found it to be really helpful. Sometimes when I'm, you know, when Brian Gilkison, who does a lot of the logistics with me, when we're sitting and talking about stuff and making sure things, you know, so many widgets showed up and so many widget X showed up and so on and so forth. That's having a definitive list is really nice, and everything. So, you know, you can pick your visuals, obviously, at this point. It can be a simple image, and I think that's what most of us go with. Nick has wonderful video updates, and one day I will get to have the time and everything to give video updates. I find them to be actually a lot more enjoyable than I thought they would be. I am pretty happy skimming, you know, emails and going, yeah, that's the piece of information I wanted. I'll go file that now. But I do like video updates. So that's one thing. You can put a video at the front. You can put just a visual at the front. All of those things may matter. And so I have put videos on to like rotate coins and stuff for the latest Kickstarter. But that was my first foray into videos. You know, having matching banners and headers and everything. You know, sometimes Kickstarters go overboard. I've definitely compressed and gotten rid of some of that. My earlier Kickstarters had kind of a visual banner system because, like Tim, I went and found Kickstarters that I thought A, delivered a good product, and B, looked good and were easy for me to access and figure out what was going on and mimic those. And then I've changed over time. And so I don't do as much of that now, and stuff. So those things are, you know, up to your style. I can tell you that sometimes I look at the way a Kickstarter front page is put together, and that often it's like reading the cover of a book, right? Sometimes it informs me of whether or not I think this person really understands what it is that they're doing when they're putting together a product. And I have passed on products that I thought were kind of cool and everything. And sometimes I've been right. They haven't panned out. Sometimes they've been great fulfillments and people love them. And I have to go back and spend twice as much money to find it. So that's, you know, it's a hit or miss thing. Tim, you were going to say something, I think.
Yeah. If I could throw one question into the mix real quick, what are your thoughts on stretch goals?
So I use stretch goals. When add-ons came out about a year and a half, 2 years ago now, I think they came out in late 2020. I started shifting most of my stretch goals to add-ons, and everything. So this gets into the weeds a little bit, right? A stretch goal is there to create some enticement for your backers, to help them maybe if they really want something, to go out and spread the word on their own to help get to the thing they want in terms of a stretch goal. I have found, you know, I did a stretch goal. So, you know, some stretch goals are useful, I think, some aren't. At the end of the day, some I don't think matter. We did a couple stretch goals. I used to put stretch goals based on dollar amounts. I've changed that. I now put stretch goals based on backer level and number of backers, because I think my thinking on what the more important metric is has changed, and I want backers, not necessarily dollars. Backers equates to dollars, but that's another issue. But I'm really looking to entice more people than get less people to spend more. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so stretch goals are useful. I will tell you this. I had a really cool visual that we're not going to get to see. Looking at Tales from the Smoking Worm 4, which is the issue with trolls, and I had I had that there, and we had a stretch goal that fulfilled in the last 24 hours. That was a stretch goal with an add-on, and only 5 backers backed it. And so that actually cost me quite a bit of money. And so in retrospect, I did a lot of rethinking on how stretch goals work. I make sure that stretch goals are not something that are going to require me to do extra art or a huge amount of investment in terms of time. And I spent more time on that character sheet than I did on a lot of things in the last 2 or 3 months. It turned out to be way more finicky than I thought it was. I had a huge headache with price changes, since I had priced things out in like this November, December, and individual prices had changed since then, and paper stock had changed since then. And so my quotes were out of date. And so I eventually found a person who could do it for what I needed it done at, and did a great job. But it took me a month of pain to figure that out. So I like stretch goals. I think sometimes they're effective. I don't think they're always effective. And so I've moved a lot of things to add-ons. That's my short of it.
Yeah, I was listening to, I believe it was RPG Ramblings,
Uh-huh.
and they were talking about just the fact that someone who's inexperienced at doing Kickstarters can bury themselves with stretch goals.
Yes.
Especially if your stretch goal is X new monsters or X new chapters or things like that you don't have written.
So that's another thing. So this is a good point. I agree with them. First of all, if you look at the budget, we budgeted in some stretch goals, right? They could be add-ons, they could be stretch goals, the bookmark, the patch, things like this. Let me tell you my quick strategy on how I would handle those. The 3 things that I put in there: I put a patch in there, I put a sticker, and I put a bookmark. First of all, I would go to the public library and print my stickers, because I have a professional printing system at the Cincinnati Public Library that will print stickers on large format vinyl printers for free. And they are the exact same machines that you go to a sticker maker and have stickers made. And they'll even cut them out, right? So you just literally get hundreds of feet of stickers at a cost of like $2 a linear foot. Nice. So I would throw those in as freebies, and they have very minimal cost. Bookmarks I have printed and I have print them on heavier laminate, and I make them useful, right? They carry little NPC character sheets, familiar character sheets, or something that people are going to use, something that tick boxes on and add on to their character, right? And they usually follow the theme of what I've got in an issue. So like the last bookmark was all the Culpeper herbs together on one bookmark, and you could go in and tell how many doses you had of them. And hopefully somebody out there will have read the Culpepers and use them and be able to hand a bookmark to a player, and they'll be able to do that. But that's one thing. Those aren't very hard to make, because it's a logo and it's some boxes, and it's an hour's worth of work in InDesign. You're absolutely right. You should never, in my opinion, create stretch goals that bury your project. And we have some examples of that in the DCC community, and I'm not going to name names, but they have definitely cost people lots of money, and especially when you double the price of a book, or double the page count, or heaven forbid, triple the page count on a book, right?
Or you switch from media mail to now you have to ship it a different manner, and your shipping costs just doubled.
Your shipping costs so everything that I think about those variables as well. That's kind of an advanced, I'd consider that kind of an advanced Kickstarter discussion. And so, but how would you build those things? If it's something that's going to cost me a lot of money to produce, more than $100 or $200, I make it an add-on and let backers decide if they want it. If it's something that like a bookmark or a sticker or something like this, or a patch, which I might be using to drive like first day sales You get the patch if you do the first day purchase, our backer level. And, that was extremely successful last time. And so that cost me money, basically as much as a bookmark, but it's a tangible reward that people really like. And so those have some benefits. Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Trevor, I got a question for you. Would you advise someone to minimize some of these particulars, such as the stretch goals and the add-ons, when it's their very first project? Would they be better off keeping it clean and simple for their very first Kickstarter and then expanding it once they've got some experience?
Two things. And I see that Tim and Nick both shook their heads yes. So I'm going to assume that they're in the yes camp. And I am, for the most part, in the yes camp. That said, I never followed that advice. And so my first Kickstarter had bookmarks, it had luck tokens and lots of little bits and doodads and stuff. And I didn't find that overwhelming, but I very carefully researched the costs ahead of time, right? I knew exactly how much I was getting into. And the expensive thing, which are the luck tokens, I made them add-ons, right? And knowing that I was going to have kind of a system for it. So I would agree with Ed. I would agree with Tim and Nick. Keep it simple. If this is your first Kickstarter and you don't know how to do it, and you're worried about things, simple is better. That said, I think if you look at my Kickstarters, if you look at the 5, every single one of them adds something I've never done before. And the reason I do that is I'm like, oh, I'm comfortable with making bookmarks. I'm comfortable with making luck tokens. I'm comfortable with making this, right? And I want to do this as well. And so I'm going to add kind of one unfamiliar thing to the mix every single time. With the last Kickstarter, it was 3D printing and miniatures and stuff. And I lucked into a situation where I now have a partner who is interested in producing those and taking part of the profits, obviously. But he's interested in doing that work and he's good at it, and stuff. So yeah, so I would say, it's good to play it safe. It's also good to dip your toe into something you've never done before and try it and see what you think about it. And as long as you price it right and as long as you build it right, you won't kill yourself doing it. And that's important, which is why I put budget as step like 1 and 2, because I don't actually build Kickstarters that way, right? I mean, like you guys, I kind of like dream up the concept, think about it a bit, and I move back and forth between 4 and 1 and 2 all the time, constantly changing and reevaluating and everything until I get to the final product, and thinking about it and ditching ideas that I find are just too expensive. Does that make sense, Ed? Did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Yeah. Nick is like just trying to say something here. I've been
through the course of this, I had lots of thoughts, and I also pulled up my the Rabid Dogs Kickstarter, because the Rabid Dogs Kickstarter, I did have stretch goals, and that was my first DCC related Kickstarter. And I was like, at $850, an additional 4 pages, at $1,200 a cover upgrade, and $1,800 a Rabid Dogs vinyl sticker, which started the vinyl stickers, which I throw in for free now with every single thing that I do. But like, I remember like, hey, these stretch goals compared to when I was doing miniature game stuff, these are like super easy stretch goals, no problem. And then I remember sitting there and being like, what am I going to do with these extra 4 pages? Or in the case of the cover upgrade, yeah, how are we going to make this cooler? Like I didn't have a plan. And so then that was a month delay.
Yeah.
Just to do both of those 2 things. And it's like you get into some of the Kickstarters that we've seen, that, how you mentioned, and there are Kickstarters that they were for a zine and they are like 6-8 months late. And not that I've never been late. I've definitely been late. I'm late right now. But at the same time, you start to add on additional time, and it really, you've got to be very cautious. And I do love the idea of doing something new and testing the waters on something new, but always remember, because you are a meticulous planner and most people are not. And so like something as simple, like you think to yourself, hey, I'm going to include a t-shirt with my zine. I've printed 1 million t-shirts for bands that I've been in and running a record label. that is way more additional packaging and costs, and you are getting yourself into a whole new can of worms by opening up something like that. So you've got to be really cautious. Like that first Kickstarter that you do, work with what you know, and then slowly build in those other things over time, and do things incrementally. Don't, like how you mentioned miniatures. I mean, people have recommended it to me because I've released miniatures. Oh, why don't you do miniatures to go along with the Precipice of Corruption? Yeah, because I know that it's going to totally change how I ship everything, and so yeah.
No, I totally agree. And then sometimes you throw caution to the wind and you do it anyway. But just remember, you can lose your shirt in the process.
Yep.
I think Tim, if you've listened to all the RPG ramblings, or many of them, where they talk about Kickstarters, and there are some really good episodes that talk about the ins and outs, and it's kind of like listening to a whole bunch of insiders talk. I'm amazed that they record those things sometimes, right? You can hear some really jaded opinions about Kickstarters and projects and stuff. Many of those page count extras are already built in to the final product, and they've already there, and they're like fake add-ons, right? Yeah. They're there, and so sometimes you can kind of, I think, and I've heard this on RPG ramblings too, certainly other Kickstarter people who produce Kickstarters and fund that way, they look at those projects and they're like, oh no, that content is all built. That content was going to be there no matter what, right? And so yeah, I would be very hesitant, and this is why I like add-ons when they popped up a couple years ago. I do not fund. I did at the beginning fund stretch goals that were add this, add that, add some art, do some things, and I no longer do those because I realize that that's a headache. This product, which is why I started with a vision. What is the product going to be? It's going to be this with this and this, right? And I'm constantly reevaluating that, like I said, but depending on the project. But before I really get serious into budget, I need to know this is the concept, and then I try and figure it out. Yeah. Does that make sense, everybody?
Yep.
Yeah. Any last words on that? That was step 5, by the way. A couple of just side notes. When you're working in the story system on Kickstarter, their page is notorious for going down, especially if you're working with a wireless network. So write your story out in a Word doc file or a Google Doc, and then paste it in. Get 90% of it written and edited before you even paste it in. I have seen comments on some of the Facebook, like the zines group, RPG zines on Facebook, where people are just face palming because they've just lost 2 days worth of work on a Kickstarter, and they've just lost everything because the save function didn't work. So yeah, take a couple minutes to write it out ahead of time and then paste it in and build it out. Nick, you got a comment on that?
I definitely don't do that. But I do.
I save often.
Exactly.
Often.
I didn't realize there was any other way to do it than to write it in Word.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I definitely type it straight into the thing. Certain things like the what is DCC, I cut and paste it from my previous one every time. Yep. Which is taken from the Goodman Games website, or like straight off of their what is DCC. But yeah, I generally work fast and loose with everything, but I also I am visualizing it as I am typing it. And now I have kind of like a standard format. Okay, here's my italic blurb. Here's the picture of the cover. Here's the sales pitch. And so it's for me, it's just like boom, 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 every single time.
Yeah. So other things to think about, you can plan short versus long campaigns. I traditionally run a 21-day campaign. Nick's run 14 and 21. Tim, how many days was yours?
21. I did 21. 3 weeks.
3 weeks is pretty good. It's long enough that someone can usually plan another paycheck, but short enough that that it doesn't kill you with waiting and people grow bored of it and everything. I think it's a good time. 14 days works good when you really have a good loyal following. I've seen 24 and 48 hour Kickstarters that produce quite a bit of money in a very short period of time and definitely get a product made. But you need to have 2,000 or 3,000 people who are religiously kind of backing you to get there. Plan your communication and updates, right? So one of the things that Kickstarter does is allows you to create updates. You can create those once the Kickstarter goes live. You can start building those and having them planned. You could write them in Word documents and have them planned out ahead of time if you really were a planner, and then paste them in. But I try and only update when I have an important thing. We hit a stretch goal, or some kind of backer reward thing. We've gone over a threshold. We funded. Things like that are really important. If I want to highlight an artist, I often highlight artists that I've brought on, and we've got a little questionnaire, and you get to see examples of their art, so you can kind of anticipate what you might be seeing when their art actually gets done, if it isn't finished yet. Sometimes, and especially in earlier Kickstarters, we used to show off mechanics. We've kind of gotten away from that, but I think that has to do with time and how much I've got going on than anything else. Showing off production images is a great use of an update, because people can scan a picture and go, ooh, that is awesome, and it gets them psyched really quick. So yeah, those are important things to do. Any comments about updates, guys? No? Okay. Step 6, run an honest campaign. I think this is really important, right? I think it's really important to respond to feedback quickly. I try not to go more than 24 hours, 12 if I can really help it. If someone has a question, I want to get them an answer and get them an answer quick. Sometimes I can't. Sometimes I've got to go do a little research to get that answer for them. It just depends on what the question is. You work really hard to shut down trolls, right? And I've seen Kickstarters become plagued by trolls. They can be there in the comments, really bringing, kind of your whole Kickstarter vibe down and everything and stuff. Manage that situation if it happens to you. Provide updates at the right moment. We just talked about that a little bit, but it's important to reiterate. And do not spam updates. So don't just do update after update after update. Nobody wants to see an update every half hour on the half hour, right? I mean, nobody wants to see more than an update every 2 or 3 days at minimum. And I've seen very effective Kickstarters that give you an update a week, maybe even less. Especially now that add-ons are a thing and you're not trying to get to stretch goals all the time, I think that's actually a good thing. Spam, not clouding people's inbox with a whole bunch of updates that aren't critical is a great thing. Finish off your campaign with style, the last step. Make sure you thank your backers. I have to tell you guys, we definitely think about, our closing, hey, we funded, everything's done statement. And we try and be honest and authentic with that, and let them know that we really appreciate the fact that people are willing sometimes to wait a little bit longer because it's going to be good, right? And we've run into a hiccup that sometimes you can't foresee, and sometimes you have a family crisis. Those things happen, and that can really, things that happen in your real life can really affect your Kickstarter timeline when you're a small group and you're not a big business. Remember that Kickstarter takes 10%, and we didn't get to that budget slide where I took off your 10%. But remember that they're going to take about 10%. If you figure 10%, you'll be happy, because you'll have over estimated what they're going to take. It's about 9%, but think about 10 and expect it, and don't be surprised by it.
That's 10% of your total revenue.
That's 10% of your total revenue, and that includes
Including
revenue off shipping, because if you put shipping into your Kickstarter, that's the total proceeds. Like my Kickstarter last night, I think went to $11,450 or something like that. That means that they're going to take 10% of that total. There's an interesting trick here. Something that I've seen that one of the Kickstarter backers or producers does is he actually immediately surveys his people, and he lets them know if they don't answer the survey within the first 48 hours, he drops them. Because if a backer never responds to you, you're still beholden to them for the product. And I have had backers, I literally had a backer 3 weeks ago finally respond to their survey from Kickstarter number 2, which was 2.5 years ago. Right. And and luckily I had set aside an issue, and I was able to mail that out to them. But yeah. And so Phil Reed is the individual. He's talked on RPG Ramblings about this, that he is very succinct. You have 24 hours to respond to the survey or he kicks you off, and he refunds your money to you right away. Because if you refund the money within the within that 2-week period, it takes Kickstarter about 2 weeks to get you your funds, then they take that off your total and they never charge you that 10%, right? But if you refund the money after the 2 weeks, they have already taken 10% out of it, and you have lost the 10% and you've lost the reward, that backer support. So you've lost 110% of that money, not just 100% of it. Prep shipping supplies well in advance. Understand what your expenses are going to be for shipping and what level of risk you're willing to take with shipping. And by the way, adjust your printing costs to account for shipping loss. The rule of thumb that I've heard many times repeated is 10%. Expect 10% loss. I hover around 2 to 3%. Nick, how about you?
About the same.
Yeah. And Tim, you probably are not quite hearing back from your backers yet if they've lost something.
Nope.
Yeah.
And so it's print on demand. So it's all I'm doing then is if they did have a problem with it or whatever, they're going to track it back with DTRPG, and then
that's right. So that is an advantage of that system. Yeah. Make sure you order your product, make sure you pay your collaborators, right? All those bills, those fixed costs, make sure that gets to people and they get paid in a timely manner. If you can't pay them before the Kickstarter even runs, make sure you pay them as soon as it's over.
3 months ago.
Yeah. Make sure you get final Goodman approval of your final layout and final PDF before you send it for printing. Because the last thing you want to do is order, 500 books and then have to trash them because Goodman has not approved it and you have a compatibility logo on it, right? That would be a major error. Ship your product as fast as you can. Tim, it sounds like you shipped your product incredibly fast. Congratulations. Thank you.
It was, well, and kind of going back when you said about run an honest campaign, one of the things I did from the very beginning was I said, you know what? I am not going to do a Kickstarter unless it is 100% written. The digital product is ready to go before I even turn the Kickstarter on.
Yeah.
The only thing I was waiting on were test prints, so that way I could see what the hard copy looked like before it went out for the print on demand. So it was literally, I think I got the notice that Kickstarter released funds, and less than 24 hours later, the digital copy went out.
Yeah. And so that's a wonderful thing to be able to do. I've seen Kickstarters run both ways. Sometimes there's a good event to be had, an entertaining thing to be done with your Kickstarter backers, almost like a Patreon, especially if they're working with you to produce a product, right? And it's a very hands-on product from the backers' viewpoint. Most backers don't want that. Most backers are using this to order a product. Basically, it's a pre-order, And so, but like Wolfgang Bauer used to do open design, and you used to spend months working with him on a product after you had paid, reading things, commenting, sometimes getting to write a little thing or something like this. And it was a very hands-on, intimate process. And that was a wonderful thing. I loved it. And I would love to see more projects like it. But then understand that the time frame needs to be, explained. We're going to take a year. We're going to write this wonderful thing, right? Be upfront about that. So yeah, Nick.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that I wanted to comment on with what you were talking about. Also going back to running an honest campaign and updates and those things. One of the things that when I first ran my first Kickstarter in 2015, I had read all of the Stonemaier Games Kickstarter advice blog, which is at the time in 2015 had like 120 articles. And I'm sure it has expanded since then. It was for somebody who's kickstarting a brand new game as opposed to a zine or a project. But they had really emphasized communicating with your backers, and I definitely over communicated in those early days. But it was a different era for Kickstarter. Now you have people that have backed 1,000 Kickstarters, and they don't want as you point out, an update every some people, I thought early on that updates were going to help drive my Kickstarter forward, And, because, oh yeah, if I hold back this piece of art and then I reveal it, 4 days in, I might get a surge in. No, it doesn't work like that. It may have, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, but it doesn't do that now. And so that's really important. But with what you said about being responsive, one of the key things that I think needs to be added to what you said is responsiveness builds trust.
Yeah.
And that is something very important because these people are taking a chance on you. And so oftentimes if people see you not be responsive, you'll start to see people drop. And it could be because you didn't respond, or it might not be, because you never know why people drop. But it's very important to make sure that you are responsive so people know that you are responsible and that they can trust you.
And that feeds in my last comment. Continue communicating with backers, even hard news, right? And so running into an unforeseen complication, communicate that. Find a solution maybe before you communicate it.
Yeah.
Sometimes if you can do that, but if it's something that really stymies you, reach out and tell your Kickstarter, hey guys, I'm having a problem because we were planning this great thing and suddenly, the head of my print shop died. He had a heart attack, right? I now need to reevaluate a lot of different things. It's amazing what happens, life throws at you. And so those serendipitous things that just happen because you need, and they throw roadblocks in your way, be honest about them and let people know I'm having a problem. We were having a problem with some editing for Smoking Word Monograph #1, For Whom the Bell Trolls. And it got delayed by a week or two because we had a family illness, actually 3 family illnesses happen all at once. And, that sucked 3 weeks worth of free time out of my life. And so things didn't quite get done and stuff, and I just, when it was over and we finally got everything and we knew what our new deadline was and how we were going to hit, I communicated that and let them know this is what's going on. And so try and be as honest as you can and try and be as communicative and upfront. And I think that will take you a long way.
Honest truth is always going to be better than silence.
Yeah. Or lying.
Right. Think about it from the standpoint of, if you are a consumer, what do you consider to be solid customer service? And make sure you deliver that same thing. Yeah,
I think that's a great thing. So that's our episode. That's everything I had. We'll open up some last minute comments, but that was kind of my 7-step plan. I'm sorry we lost a couple of visuals at the very end. They might have been helpful, they might not have been, but thank you very much, everybody, for participating. Tim, Nick, Ed, as always, it's enjoyable hanging out and doing Scrivenery. Any last comments, Tim?
I would say if it's somebody who's looking to do the first one they've ever done, hey, I've got this idea. And, and if you look around and you see some of the zines that are out there, it's, I could do that kind of quality stuff. Okay. Mm-hmm. Then you know what? Put it together. But my suggestion would be stay in your lane. Don't try and take on too much. The stress isn't worth it. If you can write it, put it together, do your layout, get it in a digital thing, and do even as simple as use Drive-Thru-RPG for print on demand, use them for digital distribution. That way you have zero fulfillment obligations, right? Your fulfillment is entering all the information into Drive-Thru-RPG so it can get sent out. It's a fairly easy way to go about it and actually get your toe wet. Stick your toe in the water, see what it's like. It's a lot more work than I thought it would be, but it wasn't really difficult. It was just, you got to buckle down and do the work to put everything together and lay it out. So I guess my last piece of advice, my last suggestion would be, if you think you've got something that's worth it, if you think you've got something that people would like to play, yes, lay it out, use the digital tools that are out there, and Kickstarter is a great way to market it and get it out there into the world and give it a try. You don't have to, and keep it simple. Keep it simple, stupid, right? KISS.
Yep. Thank you. Nick, last minute comments?
Yeah. So if you made it this far into the video, because I know this has been a lengthy one, you know, some of the things that we talk about may sound kind of intimidating, but at the same time, if you do keep things simple, I love fulfillment, but if you keep things simple, and you know, build on your experiences, all I want out of this video is for you to be inspired and make cool stuff. That is really the goal. So if you made it this far, get behind your keyboard and just make something cool, and then we have succeeded. So
Yeah, I think that's a great way to end it. Ed, anything else you want to say?
Actually, I have a quick question for Tim, if you could, if this is something that can be addressed succinctly, because
Sure.
it may be helpful for other people. So I personally, I use drive-through for everything that I've done. How do you, if you're using them for physical distribution,
Yes.
how are you accomplishing taking okay, these are the people who have backed it and they're going to get a physical copy, and now I'm going to take the funds that I presumably got through Kickstarter from them and arrange for drive-through to send them a copy?
Okay. It's actually really, really simple. So you download your backer list, you know, from Kickstarter, and it comes through as a text file or
CSV or something.
Excel file. Yes.
Mhm.
And when you go to Drive-Thru RPG, you've already got your physical copy in there. You've already got your digital copy in there. You just click on the thing that says to send out a free copy, choose the physical one, and you make a group out of your backer list. So that one file drops. So all the survey information is in there. You don't have to type individually there. That goes in, and you select that group, and then you have to pay, you know, you have to preload the dollar amount into your account for shipping and for the cost to print, and then it's done. And they do it, and the nice part is they do it. So that was an 75 print run that they did, not a single one going to 75 people. So they did, you know, because it was all put in one file or all at one time. They printed all of them, and every single one shipped on the same exact day.
Nice.
Yeah.
It was easier than I thought it would have been.
Yeah.
I was needlessly worried, and it was fairly easy.
And that's the same thing that we do for like sending out free PDFs or, you know, to backers, is we just pick the PDF
process.
version and say, here's all the emails, and, you know, here's their account. This is what they say their account emails are. And they just, boom, automatically generate and go straight to them. So,
okay,
and we
great.
Yeah.
I've seen some people do it where they have they collect money, but tell the people in the Kickstarter, hey, you're going to pay the $3 or whatever it is for production and your shipping costs. I just said, I'll take that on. And then I paid for it up front. So when it went out as a free copy to everybody.
Yeah.
You can do it either way.
Yeah. And I've done that way before. We've moved away from print on demand copies, but yeah, it's certainly a way to do it. So
it's granted. I'll be honest. I think the quality that, you know, Trevor, that you're putting out is higher than you're going to get with the print on demand. The reality is, I just want to get cool stuff out there as far as content wise, and I don't have the time, the ability, you know, in order to do that. So, and this is the way to get it out.
And some of them out of the expertise too, you know, especially if you're new into this process, you don't have that background of the more established printing processes and so forth. You know, letting them, just like we're talking about, if you're new to Kickstarter, keep it simple. You know, this would be another way to keep it simple if you're new to it.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I only do it that way because, you know, I was doing graphic design in high school, right? We had an AB Dick 900 980, I guess it was, and we were physically printing offset press copies and silk screening and stuff like that. And so to me, I fell in love with that process in high school. And to be honest, I've always just wanted to make things. So as hands-on into the making process as I can get, that is an exponential growth and satisfaction of the final product, right?
Yep.
It's not that I think that print on demand is a bad process. It just it leaves me feeling cold inside because I don't get to do the cool things. And so that's a goal, right? That's a passion issue.
See, my passion is the ideas and the gaming content, as opposed to actually doing the physical labor.
Yeah, and I'm a longtime collector and should have been a librarian, and I have a deep love of books and things like that, and physically assembling them and making them and doing all that is part of what makes my life meaningful. So to me, that's as important part of the process as writing it. As a matter of fact, it's the best of both worlds. Having a phenomenal thing that I love written in the format that I love is the best of both worlds, right? And so that's what I strive for whenever I can get it. And don't get me wrong, I have Mixam copies of standard editions as well that go out afterwards. So, but yeah, absolutely. That's and I hope that people understand that, right? I mean, the budget that we presented is a budget based on my experience, where I'm spending more money than I really should, but I'm spending it to get high quality products. All of that can be cut down to almost nothing if you really try. Go check out our other issues or episodes. They'll help you work through those problems. So yeah, just make something. That's the best thing. Tim is proof, right? That we've done our job.
I said 3 months ago, I was watching these videos.
Yeah. So anyway, thank you, everybody. I think we're at the end of the Scrivenery for today. Episode 8 is in the can. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you get something out of it. And I hope you come back and reference it and find it meaningful and useful. So,
good night, folks.
Ed, thanks.
Thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it. Thanks.
Not a problem,
Bye.
Tim. Nick, thank you again.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.